Hello and welcome to this first episode of A House in France. I'm Mark Johnson. In this series of podcasts we're going to be looking at owning a house in France and in fact also what it's like to build a house in France. And these podcasts should be of interest for people who are both thinking about buying a house or having a house built in France or actually own a house in France. And we'll be covering a whole series of topics in future episodes. Now I'm not going to be doing this alone. My partner in this is Lloyd Arrow, and Lloyd is actually just starting on his French adventure by having a house built in France. Now we're using Skype to connect Lloyd, so I hope the technology works. So Lloyd, welcome.
Hi Mark, good to be here for this first episode of A House in France. As you say, I've bought a plot of land to have a house built, which was not my original intention. So Mark, what did you look for before buying your house?
Well, we wanted a place that was quiet, so we wanted somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and we looked around probably at about 70 to 80 houses in France, all in all, and we eventually found the ideal property. It was the last ever week's focused house hunting. And the last property was the one that we bought, not because we were fed up, but because it was actually the ideal property for us. And we bought that about 5 years ago, and we've been renovating it ever since. And I'm sure we'll cover some of the stories and various encounters we've had with both the local wildlife and local builders as we go through these episodes. So Lloyd, I thought that when you first started out, I mean, you and I have known each other for many years. You were actually looking to buy a built house or a house to do up, wasn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, for many years, I spent holidays in France, from north to south, city to countryside, beachfront location, etc. And originally, my plan was to buy a place as a partial renovation project. With plenty of land, the typical English ideal, to be worked on over several years so that I would have somewhere to retire to. Having done all the work beforehand, I could then enjoy my retirement without having to do any more work on the property. Spent more years deciding where to buy and what to buy in France. My main criteria was that it had to be an hour from the beach, and as I've always lived by the sea, it also has to be good transport access to airports less than an hour away, and if you don't like flying like my brother, you can drive and catch a TGV train. So Mark, that was my reason for buying.
Yeah. So we looked at we identified an area that we liked, which was down in the Dordogne or a little bit south of that, and the real area was defined by where we could easily get to. So we're lucky living in Hampshire. We have Southampton Airport, and they fly to Limoges, to Bergerac, and to Bordeaux. So that created a triangle, and that was the area that we looked in. As I say, we looked at lots of properties, but eventually found the right one, a 200-year-old plus French farmhouse in just under a hectare. And that has some of them we looked at had lots of land, and I'm pleased we didn't buy a place with lots of land. Right, so in this episode, the first episode, we're going to be looking at what people's objectives are, and people have different objectives when buying a house in France, and we're going to just talk about some of them and some of our own experiences. A lot of people go out there with the idea of working. So Lloyd, what are your thoughts on people working in France?
I think one of the main things, really speaking, are their job opportunities in the area that you're actually looking to buy your property. If so, is it within commutable distance from your house, or would it be better to actually have an apartment where the work is in the city? After all, you don't want really to be spending hours just commuting to and from your place of work. So it might be an ideal opportunity to do some homework on the logistics beforehand. And if you have a house in the country, how easy is it to actually get to work?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, in the area that we live in, there are very few young people. I mean, it is very rural, very agricultural. Our local farmer has two sons. There's only enough work for one of his sons to work on the farm, and the other one has to work quite a way away in a city. And as you say, commuting can be quite a thing. So if people want to work and they can't find somewhere to work, a lot of people look at starting a business. Now I've met several couples who have gone out there with the idea of running some sort of business, and they end up coming back home and leaving France, which is a shame. And in most cases, because they either don't have a business plan or they haven't got a realistic business plan. I think the number one thing is to look at what you're doing, what your skills are, etc. I mean, just like you would. It's harder to start a business in France than it is to start a business in the UK, and that's because the bureaucracy is a lot worse, a lot worse. The taxes are higher. You have to pay various taxes, including a very high contribution towards pension, etc. So it's very important that if you're looking at starting a business, that you have a good idea, a good business plan, and probably the number one thing is to learn the language. So overall, beware of the bureaucracy.
Also, if you're looking at this as a holiday home, ideally you want somewhere that you can lock up and leave, somewhere where you can just turn up, go on holiday, and not have to worry about actually having to do work while you're there. It's a good idea also that you can get someone to keep an eye on the place as a friend or a neighbour. There are many companies that will actually do this for you. Even things like cutting the grass, checking the post, and various things like that from a maintenance point of view that you don't really want to do. If you want as a holiday home, why go on holiday to work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we get to our house in France, I couldn't sit on a beach anyway, but I have to keep working on the place, and it's certainly not a relaxing physically, but I very much enjoy it. We're lucky that we have some local expats who keep an eye on the place for us, and they cut the grass over the summer and things like that, and that's very important. It's very good to know that someone just sends you an email every so often saying, yeah, the house is fine, even though we had a big storm last week and all that sort of thing. I think one of the things we'll talk about in a future episode is how you can keep an eye on your house in France, and we've used some technology there, so we'll cover that. Other people's objectives for going to France are that they want to retire there. As Lloyd has said, that's his view in the longer term. But I think the most important thing, if you are thinking of retiring, is making sure that you have a good financial plan, that you can cover the unforeseen costs if any come up, that you've looked at the health system there and the costs involved there, and there have been some changes to the ages at which you can get the French health coverage. If you're retired, you have to be a French retirement age now. It used to be different to that, so look at that very carefully, and also make sure that you can weather the changes in the exchange rate. A lot of people have been hit quite hard by the exchange rate going down from 1.7 probably 8 years ago, 1.5 when we bought 5 years ago, to this morning when I looked 1.17. And if you're suddenly losing 25% of your pension because it's paid in the UK and then translated into euros, that can have a significant impact. But having said that, there are some great advantages. So don't necessarily focus on some of the problems. It's a very in areas where we are, it's a very laid back and quiet and enjoyable lifestyle for many.
On the financial notes, a lot of people think about rent out their property. But one of the things you have to bear in mind with that is the type of small member you're looking at to rent it out to. If a family, are there enough facilities on site? Are there attractions locally for both adults and children? Does the building have wheelchair access? Does it have stairs? There is a whole host of things to look out for when renting out your property. One of the things you have to bear in mind is that you'll need a secure area in which to put your own personal belongings, and keep those out of the way of the people that you're renting to. Also, that the rental period for most properties in France is generally very short. After all, you want to spend some time there yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of people think they're going to rent out a place, for 30 weeks of the year, and find that the real season is 8 or 10 weeks, or if it is longer than that, outside of that, you don't get so much rental income. So I think whatever your reason for buying in France, I think it's important to know the area, spend time in the area. If you have the time, and especially if you're looking to retire straight out there, why not rent a place for 6 months or a year and really get to know the area? You can explore, you can get to know people, get to learn a little bit of the language, and make sure that you are making the right decision on your purchase, which is it's a big step. Getting to know local expats is very important. That's the way that we've got probably most of our important information, is either by expats or by any of your Dutch neighbours or Dutch mates out there whose English is always very good and puts us to shame on our language abilities generally. So know the area, get to know people out there, look at lots of properties, and I think most importantly, have a plan. What we are also going to do in each episode is have a look at a couple of items of interest. There could be news items or things that are happening in the future. We're recording this on the 18th of November, so the big news here is that England were beaten 1-2 by France last night at Wembley Stadium.
Also, if you're looking to buy or just get a taste of France, the France show is on from the 14th to the 16th of January, that's 2011, at Earls Court. Details can be found on the website. Right,
and we're also going to give a few hints and tips, and I think we've mentioned learning the language. I think learning the language is very important. I did French back in school a long time ago and didn't really pay much attention to it, which my grade shows. But one thing I have found very helpful is a CD course that I bought, and that's by Michel Thomas. He has a very good course on learning French. He has a very, I think, unique way of learning French, and you can listen to that in the car or on an iPod, etc. So learn the language, and there are some good tools around. There's some software as well I think we'll probably cover in a future episode, but the number one thing that I recommend to people is Michel Thomas and his Learning French course.
As with Mark, and don't forget to do your homework. There's nothing worse than finding out something else at the event, and with a lot of things, as in French, don't be in a rush to go through your property. After all, French do things at their own pace. Isn't that one of the reasons why you buy there? And don't forget, if in doubt, always ask. You won't find all the answers immediately, but I'm sure there'll be someone else out there that can assist you. And as Mark said, again, finding expats is certainly a key.
Okay, that's it for this first episode. We hope to produce a show about every couple of weeks. If you have any ideas or suggestions, you can get in touch with us at our email address, which is ahif, that's the house in France, at ttfn.tv, or you can check out our blog at www.ttfn.tv/afih. Or if you look at the closing credits, you'll see the websites, our personal websites for our various adventures. www.dordognretreat.co.uk is mine, and Lloyd, for you,
is lovefrance.arrowbrothers.co.uk.
And they're on the closing titles. We look forward to seeing you again for another episode of A House in France.